As a first question, I want you to tell me, you've described psychedelics as relational amplifiers. What do you mean by that, and how does it shift how we think about healing for you?
Lovely question. Thank you. Yeah, so I think when I first, and like you, I had kind of my own biases against psychedelics. When I was younger, I kind of grew up thinking that LSD was something that was going to, that people that took it were going to have fry their brains and have flashbacks, and really grew up with all the kind of stigma and all the kind of campaigns against them in my head. And then when I started working with them as a psychologist in the clinical trials, I initially thought of them as kind of drugs that you take and they have a particular impact on the brain. And what I realized over the 10 years been working with them is that when I say that they're relational amplifiers, is people might have heard of the term set and setting. So people know that like when you take a psychedelic, there are other things that impact upon it. So the mindset you're in has an impact. The setting that you're in has an impact too. So already we can see like they work differently at different times. So the same drug will have a different impact depending on the set and the setting. And as well as set and setting, there's a third aspect which is often overlooked. And that is called matrix. And this is a very early psychedelics researcher, a woman psychologist called Betty Eisner. And she said the mindset of the participant, the setting, which is the environment, they both have a huge impact, but also the matrix. And the matrix is the web of relationships that the person is in. So that's the relationship you have with the guide. It's the relationship you have with your family, people around you. It's the social relationships that are in the broader culture. So it's this web of relationships, and they all have a really big impact on how the psychedelic will impact upon you. So they're relational amplifiers in the sense that matrix, that sense of the culture that you're in is hugely important. But as well as that, on the actual day of a session, whether you're having a psychedelic in a festival or you're having a psychedelic in a clinic or in a retreat, the person that is with you, whether it's a facilitator, guide, or peers, whoever it is, the impact that they will have on you and the field that's created between you is also hugely important. So it's not as simple as a doctor gives a patient a capsule. The patient or participant takes the capsule and has, X equals Y, has a particular effect. It's more like the patient or participant takes the capsule and that opens things up and amplifies things that are already there, the way you feel about yourself, the way you feel about other people, perhaps potentially past traumas that have been kind of pushed down. All the stuff that's there in your inner world will all be hugely amplified. And it's not just the stuff that's in you, it's also the stuff that's between you and the person that you're sitting with. So yeah, that's a kind of short version I could talk for hours about it, but that's like a short version.
I love that. And I know you talk hours about it on the course.
Yeah, I do.
And when you first began working with psychedelics, what was the most surprising thing for you about the human experience that out for you?
Actually, I think the nature connectedness aspect was one of the most surprising things, because I, again, came from a clinical perspective. I didn't have much nature connectedness in my life. I wasn't, I didn't grow up particularly loving nature. I saw nature as a thing, it's a kind of thing to look at, kind of like a picture, it's like, oh, nature's a thing that's over there. I didn't have any concept of being part of nature. And I think the thing that surprised me most about psychedelic experiences, because it was in a depression trial, was how many people described having these profound experiences of interconnectedness with everything, interconnectedness with nature, having profound experiences with, like, in their journeys in a hospital without any windows. We were as far away from nature as you could possibly be in London with no windows. And many people described having these profound experiences of feeling not just connected to nature, but I am nature, I am part of a web of existence and a kind of, interconnected, energetic fabric. And it was just a very beautiful experience for people because it's being held, belonging, feeling safe. And it wasn't everybody, lots of people didn't have that experience. But every time it happened, it surprised me because as a clinical psychologist working with people with depression, we never talked about nature. In the consulting room, we talked about addiction, we talked about trauma, we talked about relationships. we never ever talked about nature. So that was like really eye-opening for me and wonderful as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think the sense of belonging that you mentioned is so powerful of when you feel a part of nature. And it doesn't necessarily have to come through psychedelics, but I remember once being in Bologna. There's this like tower you have to climb. It's like the Tower of Bologna, and you go up, up, up. And then you look down and the people are so small. And then you realize like you're part of this huge thing, and it really doesn't make you feel alone. There's these memes going around with like a picture of the universe and an arrow, and it says, "You're here thinking about your ex," something like that. And I feel, and it's like such a sweet way of making people feel like they belong. So I really resonate with that. And since the title of this webinar is about ceremony, I want to ask, because I know you touch on this in the course as well, and maybe you can expand on how you touch it, but what wisdom do you think modern science or Western science can learn from indigenous ceremonial traditions of working with psychedelics?
Oh, so much at every stage. I think probably that for me, the main learning, and it's learning that is so crucial for us. And I feel like it's learning that if we don't really learn and heed these lessons, the introduction of psychedelics into the West is going to be very problematic. And that is, in indigenous cultures, when psychedelics are used, they're used with a group, and they are used in a way that is part of a community of care. So there are a group of people, there are ceremonies, and for whatever purpose, they're not always for individual healing, they may be for communal healing, whatever the purpose of the ceremony. There isn't an idea that you have the psychedelic and then that's it. You get on a plane, fly somewhere else and get back to your normal life. The ceremony is part of this ongoing process. And so I think that when we try and put psychedelics that require that, you talked about connectedness beforehand, and they can amplify this massive sense of connectedness. But we live in a very disconnected culture. So if we have a psychedelic experience, whether in a retreat or in a hospital, have this experience of connecting with ourselves, other people, the web of life, and then go back to a very isolated, back to a flat, get on the tube train, go back to a flat, TV, like our culture has so many ways to numb and not very many ways to connect and feel together. And so I think if we don't start to create this kind of fabric of care in our community that's help, I call them islands of connectedness, so that when people have had a psychedelic experience, there's somewhere where they can go, whether that's an actual place or an online place, and find other people, find understanding, and have ongoing conversations about how they are bringing the lessons of the psychedelic into their lives. If you don't do that, then not only can you feel very alone with it, and quite like, it can feel quite unsettling to have had this huge experience and then not have people around you that you can talk about it whenever something pops into your mind, or you might have a dream about it. If you don't have that care around you, it can feel quite isolating. But apart from that, it's that we lose the benefits, we lose the potential of what we learn, because if you can't be part of a community where you're working with it all the time and you're saying, oh, I had this vision or I had this idea in the journey, how am I going to bring this into my life? You need a community and you need time. These things don't change in like a week or a month. They take a long time to bring in. So indigenous communities were able to incorporate psychedelics, plant medicine as part of their culture. And they did that for thousands of years and developed these really, beautiful and sophisticated rituals and ways of bringing it in and making it meaningful and grounding the insights into everyday life. And I think we need to find our own way without borrowing or taking the ideas from other people that we don't really understand. We need to learn about the importance of it and then find our own ways to do that in a way that's relevant for Western culture, I think.
Find out more on advaya.life.